Tonight, saber rattling.
North Korea launches another ballistic missile over Japan.
South Korea and the U.S. respond to the increasing danger.
Plus, global economic challenges. Energy prices set to rise once again.
And mapping hate.
There was extensive research. It gave addresses. It gave the names of directors. I'll mention it.
A new interactive tool is making it easier to target Jewish people and businesses.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Dire warnings of a global recession. Welcome to Faith Nation. From our studio in Washington, I'm Caitlin Burke.
And I'm John Jessup. Well, many Americans experienced some relief when gas prices dipped from the summer's record highs. Now there's growing concern that they may spike again in the coming weeks due to oil-rich nations collectively deciding to cut production by 2 million barrels a day.
This is bad news for the global economy, which is already struggling with inflation. It also comes as experts warn there's a high risk for an upcoming global recession. CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson has more. Abigail?
Well, Caitlin, OPEC Plus's decision to drastically slash their oil production starting in November means Americans will soon be paying more to heat their homes and fill up their gas tanks, with these higher costs likely coming just around Election Day.
Disappointment, and we're looking at what alternatives we may have.
The move reverses a small increase in output OPEC Plus announced after President Biden's controversial trip to Saudi Arabia last summer.
The trip was not essentially for oil. The trip was about the Middle East and about Israel and rationalization of positions. But it is a disappointment, and it says that they're a problem.
President Biden directed the Department of Energy to release another 10 million oil barrels from the country's strategic petroleum reserve next month, and is reportedly looking to resume purchasing oil from Venezuela, which would mean lifting sanctions imposed on the country for human rights abuses. For now, however, Americans are facing imminent higher prices.
It will affect, in the end, all of us by somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 30 cents a gallon.
Kristalina Georgieva from the International Monetary Fund also claimed the global economy will likely get worse before it gets better.
High energy and food prices, tighter financial conditions, lingering supply disruptions decelerate growth. All of the world's largest economies are now slowing down.
The IMF once again lowered projections for global economic growth in 2023 and projected world economic growth lower by $4 trillion through 2026.
The global economy faces significant uncertainty.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen acknowledged continued interest rate hikes from the U.S. Federal Reserve are having negative effects outside the U.S.
Emerging markets in developing countries are often most acutely affected both by global shocks and by spillovers from the policies of advanced countries.
With rising gas prices coming soon, Republicans are encouraging President Biden not to turn to overseas producers, but to instead turn to American oil and gas production and increase their output and become more energy independent. Caitlin, John.
Thanks, Abigail. Joining us now is Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst with Bankrate. Mark, with oil production being cut back, should we expect to see gas prices rising again?
Well, oil prices have been rising slightly. Gasoline prices may rise slightly, but no one's predicting we're going to get back to the peak of more than $5 a gallon for gasoline that we saw this summer. It's a question of how far we go. Let's remember that all of this is a function of supply and demand. The United States economy is relatively strong compared to other economies around the world. Consumers have been driving using gasoline, and so that has been a factor on the demand side, also helping to push up the price.
Mark, we just heard in Abigail's piece there from the head of the IMF. How dire is this IMF warning of a global recession?
Well, having heard her comments elsewhere today as well, she's more concerned about the global economy as a whole and about perhaps about 1/3 of the nations around the world that may slip into a recession or a more serious contraction than what I think is the consensus here in the United States. For example, right now we have a very strong dollar, the strongest dollar in about 20 years. That's partly the result of the Federal Reserve pushing interest rates higher. It's also partly the result of us having a comparatively strong economy. What many Americans don't realize is that gives us a purchasing advantage in the imports we're bringing into the United States. On the other hand, it's a disadvantage for American multinational corporations, which are having to do business abroad, and our products and services are more expensive overseas. To your point, we just published a survey at Bankrate, you can read about it at the site, among economists who now put the chances or risks of a recession in the U.S. over the next 12 to 18 months at 2 in 3. That's heightened from 50-50 in the second quarter, and when they earlier predicted the chances of being 1 in 3 over the next year and a half or so. So the risks for recession in the United States are quite high. Ultimately, the big question is, how long is it? How severe is it? Those are questions that are difficult to answer at this point.
With unemployment claims on the rise, are these cracks in the Labor Department signs of a weakening economy?
No, the job market is perhaps the most robust part of the U.S. economy. That increase that you're referring to with new jobless claims in the low 200,000 range is only the second increase in new demand for unemployment assistance in 8 weeks, so 2 compared to 8. But we do await release of the monthly jobs report. And remember, we just got a reading from the Labor Department that said there were still 10.1 million job openings as of last count. That compares with 6 million unemployed right now. The demand for workers is stronger than the supply of workers available to fill those positions.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. We always appreciate your insights. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, John and Caitlin.
6 missile tests in less than 2 weeks. North Korea clearly defying international warnings. The latest missiles fired Thursday into the sea near South Korea, prompting the U.S., Japan, and South Korea to deploy warships to the region. Secretary of State Antony Blinken condemning the continuing provocations.
To the defense of our allies and partners, Korea and Japan, is ironclad. We believe that North Korea would be much better served by not only refraining from these actions, but actually engaging in dialogue.
Following today's missile launch, North Korea flew 12 warplanes near its border with South Korea. About 30 South Korean military aircraft deployed in response. Neither side engaged.
And here with us now is Anthony Ruggiero with Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Anthony, thank you so much for being with us. China and Russia have made their position clear. They're shielding North Korea from sanctions. Anthony, is there anything the United States and its allies can do to convince them to quit turning a blind eye to North Korea's provocations?
Well, thanks for having me. I think, when you look at the North Korea situation, you look at 3 different areas of pressure. You look at diplomatic pressure, you look at military pressure, you look at financial pressure. You talked about earlier about the military pressure is increasing on North Korea, but the diplomatic and the financial pressure is really nowhere to be found. They have strong words, but they're not. The Biden folks are not responding with strong actions. What they should do, if China and Russia are shielding them, which they are in the Security Council, is start sanctioning Chinese, Russian banks, companies, and individuals, and their tune will change pretty quickly. And then start going after the sources of revenue for this regime, and then start, targeting other areas of the regime to make them choose between stability and these weapon systems.
As you mentioned, China and Russia are shielding them in the Security Council. So is there anything the UN can do?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, the Security Council is deadlocked. The 2 countries China and Russia have vetoes, so we're not going to get a new resolution. We're not going to get a stiffening of the sanctions. But the good news is we don't need it. The Biden administration has all of the sanctions authorities that they need. And I think what people don't really understand is that when you look at Iran or North Korea and all these different issues, U.S. sanctions are always more robust than the UN sanctions, because we have to negotiate down to whatever China and Russia want. So in this case, the Biden administration can really do what they want because they have broad authorities given by Congress, passed overwhelming bipartisan majorities that they can use today. They don't have to do anything else other than do the designation packages to make this happen.
So you talked about the different alternatives that are available, but do you think the Biden administration will actually take those options and changes its approach?
I hope so. The only, the silver lining or the sliver of hope here is that the response that the White House had to the initial launch, the one that overflew Japan, they basically said that they're going to focus on limiting these programs, limiting the regime's ability to do these programs. That's good news if they actually follow it up with actions. And the actions are on the military side, they're doing a good job. But they need more on the diplomatic side. The coalition has really withered. And on the sanction side, the sanctions have really atrophied all the way back to 2018. So we need to rebuild both of those to be as robust as the military side.
All right. Anthony Ruggiero with Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, former President Trump, often compared to Teflon Don for his knack of surviving scandals, will the effect rub off on one of the Senate candidates he's backing, battling new scandals? We check in with CBN's David Brody next. Well, welcome back. While former President Donald Trump awaits a legal ruling in the court of law, in the court of public opinion, he continues to make the case he did nothing wrong by keeping classified documents at his home in Florida.
They raided and broke into my home. Everyone knows we've done nothing wrong. They are targeting me because they want to silence me, silence you, and silence our amazing Make America Great Again movement. There's never been a movement like this in the history of our country, not even close.
Mr. Trump making those remarks yesterday at the National Hispanic Leadership Conference. Earlier this week, his legal team asked the Supreme Court to allow a special master to review the trove of classified documents retrieved from his Mar-a-Lago property.
Joining us now is CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. David, it seems every scandal Trump faces reinforces the idea among supporters that the whole world is out to get him. Why does he keep playing up the victim card, and why does it keep working?
Well, that's a great question, Caitlin. Look, let's just take the blinders off and let's put the nonpartisan hat on for a moment. It keeps working because he keeps getting proven right time and time again. I mean, we can go down the list. We can start with Russian collusion. He also said Obama spied on his campaign, and though that might have been a bit of hyperbole, it is true that the FBI did investigate Trump during his campaign, and it was launched by the Obama administration under false evidence at the time. So that also got proven true. He talked about the China virus, right? Well, now all of a sudden we're finding out, indeed, looks like it did come from that lab in Wuhan. And we can go on and on. Lafayette Square, that was cleared because President Trump said to clear it, to have a photo op. No, it turns out that wasn't true at all either. So you can just continue to go down the list. And the reason he keeps playing the victim card is because there's a lot of evidence for him to play the victim card.
David, there was another damaging report about Herschel Walker published overnight, indicating the woman who says Walker paid for an abortion also now claims she had another child with him. Can Herschel Walker, the great football star from Georgia, withstand scandal the same way Donald Trump has?
Well, I think we're in a different day and age of politics. Some would say that's a bad thing. Most people probably would say that's a bad thing. And I think in this day and age of politics, yeah, he can survive it. As a matter of fact, what we're seeing, early indications on the ground, is that his support is increasing, that people are coming to rally for him. We even saw evangelicals praying for him this past week, gathering around in prayer circles and coming to his defense. And we know that the faith community, especially the born-again evangelical community specifically, is big down in certain parts of Georgia. So if you put it all together, I actually think this could be a boon for Walker rather than a detriment. We'll see. There's still a lot of twists and turns, like a soap opera, all of it.
David, the Washington Post is reporting federal agents have enough evidence to charge Hunter Biden with tax crimes and a false statement related to a gun purchase. What could this mean for the president?
Well, I mean, once again, just more bad news. I mean, it's just been bad news on top of bad news ever since he was inaugurated as president of the United States. And the economy, number one, but this is obviously, this is tough. And we know how close he is to Hunter, and we know how close he is to, obviously, he's a big family guy. And so, this will be hard for him. And once again, I just think it's just a cascading of events with the Biden administration to the point where they just can't escape under it. And I think because of the cascading that they're having, I think you're going to see a cascade on the red side, the red wave that is expected to come in just a few short weeks.
And we will be there to report on what actually happens. CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody, always appreciate your time. Thanks, David.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Kate.
Still ahead, anti-Semitism in America. How a mapping project is making it easier for attacks against Jews in Boston. Welcome back. The City University of New York plans to spend nearly $1 million to combat anti-Semitism on its campuses. The school came under fire for its response to a rise in anti-Semitic incidents. As part of the new push to fight against such cases, SUNY will create an online portal able to track hate crimes across its 25 campuses around the city. The move comes as lawmakers here in Washington debate how to address growing anti-Semitism across America.
Anti-Semitism is too complicated to be reduced to one cause. It can be found everywhere, on the right and on the left, among the secular and among the religious. History tells us that anti-Semitism is a virus with more than one mutation, with more than a single strain.
The Anti-Defamation League reports a sharp rise in anti-Semitic incidents since 2016, including a record high of 2,717 attacks last year.
And perhaps, Caitlin, no surprise here, technology could be playing a part in these attacks inspired by hate.
CBN's Heather Sells traveled to Boston to shed light on a new interactive tool that's making it easier to target Jewish people and businesses. It's called the Mapping Project.
Creators of the Mapping Project say it is designed to expose those who support the colonization of Palestine. It goes a step further, however, calling for the dismantling and disruption of almost 500 organizations and individuals, many who are Jewish, like Rob Likend. He is the New England director for the American Jewish Committee.
There was extensive research. It gave addresses. It gave the names of directors. I'll mention it.
Eli Kohanim, the State Department's former deputy special envoy on anti-Semitism, says the map paves the way for more attacks.
The members of the Jewish community in the United States have been completely shocked.
The Mapping Project comes amidst rising levels of violence in the U.S., as well as a rise in anti-Semitic attacks, including here in New England. Attacks like these in New York last year when an angry mob came after Jewish diners. Assailants are also known to go after elderly Jewish men and even vandalize schools.
This is the 9th anti-Semitic hate incident to happen this year at Manhattan Beach schools.
The Anti-Defamation League tracks harassment, vandalism, and assault in the U.S. Last year, it recorded the highest number since it began following the attacks in 1979. The American Jewish Committee also states 1 in 4 American Jews reported anti-Semitism in the last year.
There's tremendous anxiety in the Jewish community. This is a moment where people feel like things have changed.
Likend says that after World War II and the Holocaust, American Jews found growing acceptance in U.S. society, and there was a sense of the past being left behind. Now he sees a new boldness in anti-Semitic thinking.
People who have those ideas, who kept them to themselves, now feel increasingly comfortable expressing them.
Those anti-Jewish sentiments are popping up in the form of flyers like these dropped in suburban neighborhoods. Others blame Jews for profiting off the pandemic. This anti-Jewish hate is coming from both the extreme left and right. For instance, white supremacist-driven ideology motivated the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter who killed 11 people. Likend explains the disturbing line of thought.
The Jews are somehow the engineers behind a vast conspiracy to turn America into mud people. We're race mixing. It's all of a sudden going to turn this country into a homogenous country where white people will no longer exist. That idea sounds crazy to many of us, but it now has a very substantial audience.
On the left, there's anti-Zionism.
The notion that Israel is the worst place on earth.
Kohanim points out a trend in Europe where attacks on Jews increase when there's conflict in Israel. That is now happening in the U.S., most recently during Israel's conflicts with Gaza.
We had caravans of Palestinian flag cars driving through Jewish neighborhoods, particularly looking for Jews to attack. And in fact, they did attack Jews all across this country.
The FBI is keeping tabs on the mapping project. In Boston, a wide array of elected officials and community leaders have denounced it. Still, the site remains, and so does the threat. In light of that, Enlighten is even more focused on building bridges and encouraging conversations about anti-Semitism, hoping people will learn to better tolerate and even appreciate our differences. Reporting in Boston, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Finally, tonight, the bond between mother and son on full display in Florida. Hurricane Ian flooded most homes in Naples, but high waters didn't stop one man from making sure his mom was okay.
Johnny Lauder's 84-year-old mother was trapped in her flooded home. Without hesitation, her son, a former police officer with diving training, started swimming to save her, capturing the dangerous trek on his phone. Nearly an hour after diving in, Lauder finally reached his mom's house. He found her shivering up to her neck in floodwaters. But even the cold couldn't stop from putting a smile on her face when she saw her son. Lauder's mom was taken to the hospital and treated for an infection. She's recovering well from the ordeal. Caitlin, I know you researched the story.
I did. You know, I was wondering how exactly he got his mom through those floodwaters he had to swim through for 45 minutes. Apparently, they waited for 3 hours until the waters receded enough for the wheelchair to go through.
That makes so much more sense.
Yes.
Thank you for explaining. And thank you for watching Faith Nation.
We'll see you tomorrow.